Hi Sewing Bees, I'm Sookie and welcome to the Beehive. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you 10 additional non-sewing sewing notions. These are basically things that are laying around your house that you are able to use in your sewing studio. Now I've already created 2 other videos just like this, and I will include the links in the description so that you can check them out because you're absolutely going to want to. But after those videos were posted, I got hundreds of comments from viewers like you that gave me some really great ideas. Some things that I had already covered, but honestly, things that I didn't even think of. So I'm so excited to be able to share 10 additional non-sewing sewing notions with you today. So in no particular order, let's get started. First up is an empty pill container. So, prescription pills or even like your traditional aspirin over the counter kind of thing. But really, there's a couple of uses that you can do with these little empty containers. The one that always kind of comes to mind for me is when you're finished with your needles. So like once you're done with your needles, let's say that, as you're finished with the needle, you've stitched with it, it's time to toss it. Start a little container for all of your used or broken or bent needles, so that way you're not just throwing a needle inside your trash can. Usually I do this myself, and I might have 3 or 4 needles, and I don't know, I always have containers, so I just kind of toss them, but I really do avoid putting just a needle into the trash can because I'm not the only one that touches that trash bag. It's gonna also, be the trash man, and I just don't want to accidentally have anybody get poked. So the other thing would be to organize like buttons or even bobbins or really any small tiny item that you want to keep organized. So you could just keep like buttons and stuff inside one of these little empty pill bottles. Okay, this is a tip that came in from one of the comments, and I thought it was brilliant. So it's essentially using these 3M hooks. They come in different sizes and colors, and I've even seen them with different finishes, like, clear, white, but I also saw them with like brass and gold at the store. So I thought clear might do the trick best though, but you're gonna need one of the hooks, and you're going to need one of the little sticky things that goes along with it. So here's what the idea is, that you can, sometimes when you're picking up your ruler, like I have to like scooch it to the end of the table and then I can pick it up. So the idea of this is, I want to make sure it's not in your way, but that you would apply this, and we have to read this. So this goes on the wall. So this is going to go onto this right here. So I'm going to put this side onto my hook, and then the ruler would be the wall, so to speak. So we're just going to peel back this paper. Okay, and now we're going to place this onto our ruler. Especially with little rulers like this, it works really good with. And I had never seen this. I thought this was such a great suggestion. So I just place it in the center, and now I can just pick my ruler up real easily. So, moving it around and doing cutting, I personally think this is a really clever idea. And I suppose if you had hooks on the wall, you could even hook it onto the wall. So, I guess I'd really just be up to like your placement of your actual hook and what your hooks on your wall look like, maybe like big rings or something. But anyways, I think this is such a cool idea. And then just know that these come in a package, and there always comes with extra sticky things. So then what you would do, I'm just going to pick this up, but you would pull the little tab here, and as you're pulling that, I don't want to pull it and snap myself, but as you're pulling it, that's when you're able to, there we go. You can see it's coming off now. So this way your ruler is not permanently damaged or anything. Now this is not usable anymore, but you get the idea. So again, this came in from one of the comments on the last video. So really excellent idea, those 3M hooks. All right, let's talk about binder clips. Now, these come in different colors and sizes. I personally got these because they have little bees on them. So how cute is that? But really, this will work with any kind of binder clip. You can even get these at like your inexpensive stores, like the dollar store. I saw them. I did get these at Target because, like I said, it had little bees and flowers on them, and I thought they were real feminine, and they're totally on brand with Sookie Sews. But really, there's several things you can do with these. The one that comes to mind first is holding seams in place. So just assume that you have two pieces of material, right sides together, and you would just use these clips to put onto your fabric to hold it long enough to go do some sewing. Now, I do want to mention that if it were late at night and you wanted to put a bunch of your pieces of material together, you could do this too. Just kind of this way they lay nice and flat. You know, the other nice thing is they're not going to come off. Sometimes when you use pins, well, now you're worried about poking yourself, or even like the little wonder clips that, if you've seen those are, you know, an actual sewing notion, and they're very clever and very cool, but they're easy to fall off as well. So this is going to really, these binder clips are going to stay on even overnight, even if you can't get back to it for a week or two, you're sewing. So this, I really do like this. So this right here would be for like holding your seams in place. The next one would be for binding. So let's say you've got your little quilt sandwich here and you're going around and you want to hand do your binding. So same thing, same concept. And then you can put this, like if I take my binder clip and I go all the way in, I feel like that's gonna maybe bend the binding right here. So I feel like I would probably put it a little bit more here on toward the end. The other thing too is, and I've seen ladies do this, where you can close it, remember, but if you put the clip so that there's a little bit of the extra fold there, you can, you know, essentially stitch the whole thing down without even taking these clips out. So this is kind of a really cool idea for hand sewing. And of course, if you were machine stitching your binding on, you would just need to stitch, remove, stitch, and remove. So that would be for binding, like for hand sewing, or even binding just a regular quilt. The next is, this came from one of the viewers, is they use binding clips to attach bulks of material. So let's say you've cut all of your pieces for your quilt or your whatever, and you've got all these little blocks and it's all stacked together. This is just a really great, easy way to just keep everything together, all in one place. Another suggestion from one of the comments in the last video was that they take and add their pattern pieces to this as well. So let's say you've done your cutting and you want to keep that pattern piece on top of your material, you could just add a binder clip to it really quickly. So again, that's another use for binding clips. And then the last is kind of along the same lines, but I do like how this one is specifically for hems. And again, depending on how you stitch this, you might even be able to stitch the machine with the machine going, or the needle going in this direction, and never even have to remove those. It just depends on how your machine's set up. But I feel like this is just, again, a really great way to, you know, if you've got to hem something, you can clip these on and you don't even have to do it right away. This is going to stay on there for as long as you need it to, and it's not going to damage the material, and it's going to be ready for when you go back to it. So this one is the binder clips. Next up is safety pins. Now, safety pins may not seem like it's a non-sewing notion because you probably already have these in your sewing room, but a lot of people don't. So I just wanted to show you, there are several things. I could probably make a whole video on just what safety pins can do. So definitely let me know in the comments if I don't cover something, be sure to let me know. I did want to do, as a side note here, I keep my safety pins in this little like cat purse thing I bought years ago when I was traveling, and I just loved it. It's got like a little, you know, cat charm, whatever. Anyways, that's not the point. The point is, this is where I keep my safety pins. But I got to thinking that this, our empty medicine or empty pill container or bottle, this would also be a very good place to store safety pins. So, you know, here's another use for that little pill container. We'll just put this over here. The first item up for showing on the safety pin is something that you probably have already seen, but if not, I'm going to show you the best way, the most efficient way of turning a little tube right side out, especially smaller tubes that aren't, you know, as easy to turn. But I'm showing it here because a lot of times what we do is we'll put the safety pin through the end of the material, like the actual tube. What you should do is put it through the seam allowance. This way you're not accidentally pulling any strain or stress onto the opening. So put the safety pin through the seam allowance, and then you're going to take that safety pin and go down through the center of your tube opening, and you're not worried about having to actually put any strain on the opening, because sometimes it will get caught or whatever, and this is the best way to do it. So if it's in the seam allowance, it will also turn right side out a lot easier. And now you're not stretching out the opening of that tube, and you have 2 layers, that seam allowance, as opposed to just the 1 layer here. So that's kind of like a double info on using a safety pin for turning tubes right side out. Okay, now that you've got your tube turned right side out, let's talk about feeding elastic inside the tube. But also it could be like a drawstring. This is gonna, you probably have already done this 100 times. Take that elastic, put the safety pin in through the end of it, and then you can just feed the end of the safety pin up through your tube, right? But here, I'm gonna show you another thing. In one of the other videos, I talked about something to do with a straw, but this one, I totally forgot to mention this, and I'm really glad I'm talking about this technique, because first we're gonna just cut off the end of the straw, unless you don't have one that's flexible. Like, I don't really want the flexible part. I don't need it. So I've gotten rid of that, and all I have left is just part of the actual straw. So here's what you're gonna do. We are really going to take the elastic and the straw, and we're going to safety pin those 2 together. And you'll see how quick we're going to do this. We're going to put the safety pin through the elastic, and then we're going to pierce through the straw so that it is as, like straight as can be. And now we're going to take that straw, feed it up through our tube, and the biggest challenge is just to make sure that that safety pin is laying nice and flat, like right here. That's the big challenge. And then once we start pulling it, you'll be able to see how quickly that went. And now we've got our elastic inside there. Now we're going to take a second safety pin and clip it onto, depending on whatever your pattern calls for, however long the elastic needs to be. And we're just gonna safety pin through the elastic and the tube. Now we can remove the safety pin from our straw, and we can give this a tug. And we're not worried about this other piece of the elastic popping out, because we've got it safety pinned. And there you go. You're able to get that elastic inside of the tube. Same thing goes for if you're doing like a drawstring. You can still use the same straw method. And so that is another use for safety pin, but also a straw. Okay, the next is, I'm kind of showing like a teeny tiny little example of this, because I'm not really doing any garment making right now, but really I do this all the time. In fact, when I made costumes, once upon a time, I was a costume designer at Busch Gardens, which is a theme park here in the Tampa Bay area. And we almost exclusively used safety pins in the costume shop. And that was because we would have to fit our performers really quickly, and we couldn't use straight pins because we would, poke them. So safety pins are a really great way to do fittings. So what I would do a lot of times is I would put my pattern pieces together. Let's just say this is a tiny little version, but doing a full size garment, and you would just simply use the safety pins. Now you would probably want to have these safety pins, if you're doing fittings, you want them to be as close as possible. So because right here, if I was to open this seam, I'm not getting a true accurate fitting. So I would probably even, maybe do a couple of them here. It just really depends on what it is that you're doing. But this was a total hack that we would do in the costume shop like all the time with these safety pins. The other thing too is just kind of a side note for garment makers. Let's say that you want to try this on. When you're trying to fit something, you never want to fit it right side out. You always want to fit it wrong side out. That way you can have control and get the fit really nice. And again, use those safety pins to get that seam to lay nice and flat and get a really good idea of how the fit of the garment is. Okay, the next one is kind of crazy, and I'm not sure if you've ever heard this or seen this, but really it's just the coolest thing. If you take something out of the dryer or you're working on a piece of fabric, especially like if you've washed a bunch of fabric, sometimes, and I don't know if you can hear it, it's got like static cling. This is the coolest thing. This is just science right here, my friends. When you have a piece of fabric, or you can use this with your garments, but if you have a piece of fabric and it has static cling, like see how it's kind of wanting to stick together? If you take a safety pin and you put it anywhere in that piece of fabric, the static almost comes out immediately. It is really interesting, but essentially that safety pin going through the fabric, the metal will divert the static electricity that's being built up, and then you won't have any more static cling. So this is a safety pin, but however, anything metal should do the same trick. So when I was doing costumes back in the day, if we had static electricity, we would take like a metal coat hanger and just go like this. But I just been dying to share this with my audience because I think it's the coolest thing ever. So again, static cling, take a safety pin, put it through one piece of the fabric. If it's not working right away, just put it maybe a little bit further away and you'll watch the static cling just go away. It's the coolest thing. All right, the next is something just kind of simple and cool. You're going to take a safety pin and some of this like medical paper tape. It's just a low adhesive tape, so it's not going to gum up your machine, but it's going to hold what we're doing long enough to accomplish what we want. So I've got my machine set up for a zigzag stitch, and I'm just going to take the safety pin and tape it to the top of the machine so that I'm able to feed trim through the opening. And I want to make sure that this is going to stay though. I want to put it on there nice and good. So let's say that we were going to do some adding some trim to a piece of material. We do want to make sure that we use an open toe foot or a foot that's cording, something that will allow us to put that trim or that cording underneath. So I've got my open toe foot on, and now I've just got my material, and really we're just going to kind of stitch around here. I've got a zigzag foot, or excuse me, a zigzag stitch. And all I'm going to do, and I am going to make the length of my stitch a little bit longer, but I'm just going to take my little trim here and I'm going to go underneath and start stitching. Now what this is going to do is just kind of hold it and guide our trim or our cording where we want it to, and you'll see what happens. So as I'm stitching, I'm not really worried about having to keep an eye on that trim as much anymore because that safety pin is doing it for me. And then when we're finished, we have our little trim stitched on. So yeah, this is kind of a cool little way to help keep that trim in place and truly kind of like in place but out of the way at the same time for doing stitching. And the last thing that we're going to talk about today for safety pins is very simply marking your pattern pieces. I always am very consistent and I do the same thing every single time. If I use a safety pin to mark my pattern pieces, it's always the right side versus the wrong side, but it's always the right side of the material and the top. And that way, if I have a big pile of pieces here and they all get jumbled up, I always know that this is the right side and this is the top. So that's just a good little trick to know. I would love to know what other things you think we should do with safety pins. Who knows, maybe I'll make another video, but let me know in the comments below. What else do you do with safety pins in your sewing studio? The next non-sewing sewing notion are Post-it notes. The first thing that comes to mind with Post-it notes is something that I do all the time, and that's if I'm changing my needle, I will slip a Post-it note underneath. It sticks to the bed of your machine, and now I'm not worried when I take that needle out that it's going to fall down into my bobbin case. So that is just something I do a lot, and that's the first one. And then the next one though came from one of the viewers, like leaving a comment, and it was to use a little stack of Post-it notes instead of a hump jumper. So let's talk about that. First of all, I am going to switch my presser foot to a standard foot. So kind of like the generic foot that your sewing machine comes with. So I've got that. And now what I'm talking about is when you're sewing over a very, very bulky seam such as this. And let's just say this is kind of like a jean hem seam, something that's really bulky. And what you want to do is you want to go like, fold it once, and then you want to fold it a second time. Well, the first thing that I would recommend is take a pair of really sharp scissors, such as these. These are this part of the Sookie Sews line, and they are the 5.5 inch all-purpose craft scissors. But I'm going to cut my seam allowance up to the seam where it's going to be the hem. So let's say the hem is a 1 inch hem. That means we're going to be folding it a 1/2 inch and a 1/2 inch. And then all I've done is cut it where it's going to get folded. So it's going to get folded here, and it's going to get folded there. But what you'll do is you'll take that one side and you're going to push it to the left. And now when you go to fold, you're not folding bulk, bulk, bulk. You've kind of balanced out the bulk. So we've got this here, and now what we're going to do is we're actually going to get some binder clips to hold this in place. Okay, I've got my bumblebee binder clips. Say that fast 5 times. All right, so I've got my bumblebee binder clips, and I'm just kind of holding my little seam in place here, creating the hem. Another kind of cool thing about these binder clips is that if you leave them long enough, it kind of even like helps that hem kind of like stay flat. But anyways, what we're going to do is we're going to get our machine, or our hem up into the machine, and we're going to begin to stitch. But now what's going to happen is once we get over this big hump here, or we're going to try to, our presser foot's going to like wave up and then it's going to snap down. So what we're going to do is we're going to, whatever the thickness of our hem is, we want to have a little stack of Post-it notes that's pretty much the same thickness. This way our foot will have somewhere to land onto, and then we can gradually move the Post-it notes out of the way. So here we go. So there goes our foot. Now our foot is actually kind of straight across here, but when we go down, it's going to want to pop up. And this is where the Post-it notes are going to come in handy. So we're going to keep stitching, and then we're going to actually just kind of lay that Post-it note there so that it's laying on where the foot is. We don't want to stitch over the Post-it note. Okay, now we can kind of slowly begin to remove that little stack of Post-it notes. And there we go. Our seam looks fantastic. So that's instead of using a hump jumper, which that's a notion that's out there. But if you don't have one of those and you got a little stack of Post-it notes, that works really good. Now another viewer mentioned instead of the Post-it notes, they also mentioned just taking a wad of fabric that's exactly the same thickness and doing the same thing. So as you've gone over the big hump or the big seam, you would just take that thickness of the fabric or whatever you're going to use. I mean, today we use the Post-it notes, and just continue stitching, and eventually it kind of just moves out of the way. So that is 2 uses for Post-it notes. The next non-sewing sewing notion is just simply a lighter. What I use mine for mostly is when I'm working with like a trim that you're going to be stitching on, or something that is definitely synthetic. You don't want to do this with cotton, but anything that's synthetic, you can, at the very tip so that it doesn't continue to fray, you can just light it up and then give it a moment, because it's synthetic, it's turning into, it's melting, really is what it's doing. So this is a great little thing, to kind of have into your sewing section, especially if you work with a lot of trims. Now let me do it on this side, because this one's really frayed, so you can really see what's going to happen with it. You can actually see how it like pushed itself down and got rid of all the fraying. So that's really cool. And then this came in from a viewer. So if you're trying to shorten a zipper and you don't want the extra pieces there, but you also don't want, you know, maybe it to start, I don't know if you can see that or not, but you don't want it to start fraying. What you can do is once you've cut it, it's going to eventually fray if you don't do this, because we're going to do the same thing. Now, you got to make sure that this is synthetic, and then this will work just fine. You're just going to put the end of the zipper right in there, and it's basically melted it, but now it's not going to fray ever. It's going to stay exactly like that because we've just essentially melted the fibers. And that is just a little lighter. The next non-sewing sewing notion is actually kind of a twofer. I want to talk about a hammer, which I think every sewer should have in their sewing room because you can do rivets, grommets, you know, anything that you need that extra force, you've got that right into your sewing room. So I have this cute little pink one that just lives in my sewing space. But the other is tissue paper. So if you're working with a material that's really, let's say like vinyl, when you stitch it and you can't press it, you could try and roll it. But I will say that when you're working with like vinyls or something that's even like this braided, this trim, what you could do is you could go and hammer this. Now I'm not going to actually hammer this because my camera and my table will just shake. But what I would do is I would take a towel, go outside, lay the towel in the concrete, lay my seam probably open but upside down, and then I would start hammering that seam nice and flat. So something that's like braiding like this, like thicker, that's going to work, or even like jeans or denim if you're working with a hem. But here's the thing where I'm kind of combining the concept of the hammer and the tissue paper. When I'm working with something like vinyl, like this seam right here, you can't take an iron and press this because it's synthetic and you will melt your iron. But what you would want to definitely have is a Teflon pressing foot. And this is just, you know, it's real smooth. It can glide on that vinyl with no problems. You won't get any puckers. It lays really nice and smooth. But sometimes when you're working with the vinyl, you are stitching and the bed of your machine wants to get stuck. So what you can do is now this is where the combination comes together. You're going to use your tissue paper, just like for a gift that you're going to give to somebody. You'd lay the tissue paper underneath on the wrong side, use your Teflon coated pressing foot and stitch the seam. And now when you're finished, you would just come over here and you would rip away that paper. Now it would probably take a little bit more care, and you can get in there with some tweezers even. That's another non-sewing sewing notion, and get rid of all those little pieces there, but that's easy. Those are going to come out with no problem. But now we've got our seam, and now we're going to go outside and we're going to lay a towel down and we're going to turn our seam so that it is right sides facing up. But I probably wouldn't just start whacking at this vinyl with a hammer because it might leave marks. So I would come back, maybe quadruple, you know, like put several layers of the tissue paper over top of this. You know where your seam is, you can feel it, and then start hammering the seam so that it's open, and then same for your hem. Bam, 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 bam. So that's why I say this is kind of like a combination of non-sewing sewing notions. A hammer and some tissue paper. The next non-sewing sewing notion we're going to talk about are paper clips. So many things you can do with this, but the first one I'm going to talk about is creating really quick binding or like a purse strap. And we're just going to fold this is just a 2-inch strip, and it's not really even perfect. And that's kind of the point. We're just going to fold it in half and in half again, sink it underneath the presser foot, lower the needle, and we're just gonna stitch a couple of stitches, sink the needle. Okay, now what we're gonna do is we're gonna fold the other end of our purse strap, and we're gonna take a paper clip and kind of feed this paper clip back and forth so that it forms folds. You can see it kind of actually created we've actually created the folds there. And then I'm gonna, we had it this way, and now I'm gonna put it this direction, like at the top of it. And then just to hold the other end in place, I'm gonna put another paper clip and just kind of going back and forth with this to create the folds. While you finish stitching it up. And that's just a really easy way to create like a little purse strap with paper clips. The next, we're going to kind of combine these together. We're going to use one paper clip to help us get our hem perfect. So if we wanted to just hem something and we wanted to stitch perfect, we could use a paper clip. And then also adding trim to the bottom of like a folded area like this. So what we're going to do is, let's do the trim first. We're going to place the trim exactly where we want it. We're going to slide it underneath the presser foot, lower and sink our needle, and just do a couple of stitches. And now, so now we can see exactly where that trim is landing on the bed of our machine. And we're going to open up our paper clip. So it's kind of like this right here. And we're going to have the larger side on the bottom with a piece of paper tape. We talked about things to do with this tape in a previous video, so I'll have a link in the description. And what we're going to do is place the inside of that paper clip right on where the trim and the hem meet, and just lay it flat on the bed of the machine, just like that. And now this is going to hold our trim and fabric in place. So now it's sewed that bottom seam perfect. And now if we wanted to sew across the top here, we would do the same thing. But now we would move our paper clip and piece of tape. And now we have the trim stitched exactly like we want it to. It's perfect on the top and the bottom. And then the same thing goes for a hem. So if we're hemming, this happens to just be kind of like at the perfect place here. And there you go. And the last thing we're going to talk about using paper clips for today would just very simply be organization. I do this, and I have for years used paper clips to organize my trims. And I have boxes of trims that I've had for 20 plus years, and I just like to organize them this way. So that's just really easy. Wrap it around, put a paper clip inside there. But then this came in from one of the viewers to use the paper clips to organize buttons, which I thought was really kind of clever. So we're going to first just open up the whole paper clip, but then at the end you want to close it down so that they're not going to fall off. And then you would just very simply feed the buttons onto there. And then at the other end, do the same thing. So now you've got your buttons all organized, and you can just throw them in your button jar or button box, or however it is you organize your buttons, and they're all going to stay together. The next non-sewing sewing notion is a bar of soap. Now, I have seen many videos on this, many tutorials of how to mark your fabric, and typically darker fabric is going to work best because the soap is white. I have never seen anybody actually try to take it out or show what happens. So I'm going to show you that today. So yeah, you're going to take your basic soap and you're going to cut it into pieces, or use one that you've already got. You do want to have like a nice sharp edge because we are going to do the marking. So what we're going to do is you are going to use like a darker piece of fabric. I'm just going to mark a line. And I have to say that this does mark really nice. I do like the idea that it marks really nice, and you know, you clean your hands at the same time. But what happens though from here, now let's go to the next step. So the next step would be to, when you're finished, I suppose if you're going to wash your project, or wash your garment, or whatever it is you're working on, then it's going to, you know, go away in the washing. However, what's going to happen if you press it? So as soon as you press it, I just want to show you what does happen. Let's just kind of leave it on here. It somewhat goes away, but it doesn't entirely go away. And a lot of times we sew, we mark, we sew, we press. So I just want to just show you what does happen. That line, it's not going away. So just kind of keep that in mind. Now, what I did was I did one here. I marked it, I pressed it, and then I got it wet. So let's say that, what's going to happen now? Okay, so I think I might have added a little too much water, but that's okay. You all get the idea. So once you do wash it, or if you're gonna press it, just know that that line, you might wanna test it on your material. But even then, I still do see like a real faint line. So just make sure that whatever that line is, if you do happen to see it, it's okay. It's not too bad, but I wanted to show that to you all. And then the last thing too is that if you want to know more about marking materials, I have an entire video that's about all different types of marking pens. So just follow the link in the description about the video on marking pens. Okay, now the next thing is something that you may or may not have laying around your house. You might actually have to buy one of these. But when you work with materials that have a lot of thick pile to them, like this right here, or velvet, or corduroy, anything that has a pile, like it's a pile of yarns, so it's like a thickness to it. What you're gonna do is if you go to press this seam, you are going to crush those fibers, right? You're just smushing them. So this came in from one of the viewers, and I gotta say, this was the coolest tip I have seen myself. So I really appreciate her mentioning this. But what you're gonna do is get a dog brush. And now we do have a dog. I stopped using this brush a while ago because we found a better alternative to using, brushing our dog. But this was kind of still left over in my dog stuff. And I thought, wow, what a great opportunity to show this. So if you're pressing velvet or things that have pile, you want to use a needle board. Needle boards are very expensive. They're usually long and skinny, and they can be $50, $60, $100, $150, depending on what kind you get. But really, essentially, it's this. It's just a board that has lots of these little tiny metal needles poking out of it. Now, I do have to caution you that this is rubber. So if my iron touches this rubber or that plastic, it's gonna melt. So you just kind of have to keep that in mind. But as I practiced this, I thought, what a clever idea. So all you're really gonna do is just lay your seam over top of the brush, the metal pieces, and I'm just very gently pushing that down. And then I'm just gonna go over. In fact, it's kind of cool. I can hold the handle, and then I'm just gonna go over that seam. And then I'm gonna reposition and go over the next little section. And then we're gonna do one more on this side. And my seam is laying flat. I can see it. And then here's the best part, that when you're finished, your seam lays flat and you can't even see where your seam is. So using a dog grooming brush as a velvet board, I think this is one of the coolest things I've ever even seen. Well, sewing bees, I sure hope you enjoyed today's video and maybe learned at least one new thing. If you found this video helpful and useful, do me a favor, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, be sure to subscribe, but most importantly, share this with just one other sewing friend that you think would find this information valuable. And until I see you next time, I hope you have a creative day. Bye-bye.